This is Rob Tebbutt for Boxing News. Delighted to be joined by Shane McGuigan. We are here in Riyadh, Saudi Arabia. Zurdo Ramirez versus Chris Billam-Smith for the WBA and WBO cruiserweight championships of the world. How you doing, Shane?
Good, thanks, mate. Nice to see you out here.
It is. It's always nice to see you. It's not the most normal of places that we bump into each other, Riyadh. But all, it's still great to be out here and great to be out here for a big fight.
Yeah, mate. I mean, look at the suite that we're in. It's not normal. It's not the usual Holiday Inn that we do our 2 a.m. post-fight interviews in.
No, it's far from that. I said to Chris Billam-Smith, obviously your charge, that you could probably fit a decent-sized boxing gym somewhere in this. I don't want to call it a room. It's not a room, is it? It's like an apartment complex.
Yeah, it's probably most likely an apartment. There's 2 rooms and I think there's a prayer room in there as well. So, and there's a lounge and stuff like that. So it's a decent size.
Quite a far cry. I kind of spoke to Chris about what his recollections were of his first fight week and how that was different to this week, and particularly yesterday with the grand arrivals. It's been quite a journey for the gentleman, hasn't it?
Yeah, the O2 Academy down in Bournemouth against Ross Henshaw. It's a little bit of a difference, a bit of a change, but I mean, most of the good fighters, they all start at the bottom and work their way up. Even someone like Canelo when he was 15, 16 boxing in Mexico. I mean, just where he's at now. Obviously, he was touted as a phenomenal star going through since he was a kid. But whereas Chris obviously didn't get the accolades, but it's lovely to see it all unfold in big nights like this.
What does that give a fighter that you don't necessarily, and this is not, it's not necessarily a blanket comparison. There are differences between and kind of unique scenarios with kind of your established amateurs, people who come off that conveyor belt with world medals, Olympic medals, etc. Somebody like Chris and like Canelo have started in much different surroundings than, making your debut as a co-main at the O2, for example. What kind of resilience, what kind of character does a fighter get from doing it, quote unquote, the hard way?
It's the right way, because this problem with these guys coming out of the amateurs, they get a whack of money and then they haven't actually boxed anybody. Yes, they've boxed people as an international, as an amateur, but you can fake 9 minutes, you can be talented and switched on for 9 minutes, but dogging it out for 36 minutes against the same opponents are very different, with different shaped gloves, different ounce gloves, with used to be head guards. Now obviously there's no head guards in the amateurs, but what they lacked in head guards, what they sort of the glove composition back in 2008, 2010, times like that, the gloves were thinner around the knuckles in the amateurs, so you'd still get decent knockouts, but they had head guards in. Then when they took the head guards off, they changed it to 12 ounce gloves and big puffy things, and so it kind of just made it even safer. So from coming out of an amateurs and being a decorated amateur star, it's not the same as at the end of the day, these guys are prize fighters. Every time they go in the ring, it's for a prize, it's for money, whether it's money or accomplishments. But doing that in the professional ranks is the most important thing. That's why you'd be better off as a promoter paying these fighters more money throughout their fights, rather than there's a big whack and then we'll sort of because at the end of the day they might divvy it up the same over 2 years, but it's important for them to go through the experience and have those tests, and keep trying to strive for more rather than getting a lot straight off the bat. Because how many Olympic medalists and stuff like that have not achieved it in the professional ranks? Like Frankie Gavin is an example, phenomenal talent, but got a big whack of money, came off, being the first world medalist in 2007 in Chicago. Obviously didn't go to the Olympics because of weight issues, but then he came into the professional ranks and didn't quite materialise. Tony Jeffries didn't quite materialise. So it's not, and that's not necessarily individualising them and putting a dampener on their career. It's just they had a style that was suited for those ranks and that style of boxing, and it doesn't always transcend. Whereas you've got like a Josh Warrington or a Chris Billam-Smith or people like that, even someone like another US star is Gervonta Tank Davies. He started so young. Or you've got that new kid from Mayweather's gym, exactly. He's a phenomenal fighter, and I think like they're learning their craft and they're getting better in the professional ranks rather than maximising their talent in the amateurs and then crossing over with this huge expectation with a load of money, and then they've got a long career ahead of them, like where it's almost they're set up for failure.
Yeah, it doesn't help ease the transition. Puts a lot of pressure on it. Speaking about Chris, as I just spoke to him about kind of how different he is now, both as a person and as a fighter, from that Chris Billam-Smith who made his debut all of those years ago, and obviously was coming up to spar on Christmas Eve or whatever it was, years and years ago, with the likes of David Haye and George Groves. When you take somebody from the start, from a training, from a technical point of view, is it easier to kind of ingrain that professional boxing side into them rather than somebody who's, I mean, I know it was a very different stage of his career, but somebody like Luke Campbell who achieved everything there was to achieve as an amateur? Do you have the, I guess, more of a mouldable clay as opposed to somebody who's a little bit more established?
Yeah, I think it's easier. Not easier. It's like it's a different project as a coach. You know, you get somebody that has all of the attributes. Like if you look at even Caroline or Adam, like they came to me so early on in their careers, and now like they're 3 years on. One's a interim world champion, the other one's a European champion. Obviously, he's moving on to world level now. So, like, you can make that transition quite quick, but you also get the opportunity to say, all right, well, let's test out styles, or let's work on things and watch them spar. And there's just not as much expectation on them. Whereas when they come to you at like George Groves, for instance, off the loss of a Badu Jack, lost twice against Froch, and it was like, okay, the expectation is he's always had the ability to become a world champion, and he should be a world champion. We just need to get it right now. But luckily with George, we had that long, we had Andre De Luisa, then we had David Brophy, then we had Martin Murray, and then we had Gutneck, then Chudnov. So he had a few fights before we got to that title contention, and then obviously he had his big win against Eubank and stuff like that. So it was a different structure. Whereas, and same thing with like Lawrence Okoli, he came to me as a British champion. But I personally think it's not, they don't have to get them straight from the amateurs in. But if you're working with fighters that they've got a 60 or 70% chance of winning a fight, there's an element of risk, but there's not like, okay, we're in a 50-50 here. Like on terms of just actual ability, it's hard to then, not so much, it's like not hard, but like there's just more focus on getting it right. And then they might have more focus on, they might really try and like pick out certain things and really try and work on specific things that you're teaching them, rather than like, you don't get to this stage without being dog shit. Like, believe in yourself. Let's just try and tweak a few things. And this is a dynamic change. That's why I think a lot of these fighters, they don't want to align themselves. I'll turn over with my amateur coach, or I'll turn over with such and such, because it's just, I should beat these guys anyway for the first 8 to 10 fights. And then they get there and they're like, okay, now I'm going to change. It's like, oh, well, now the risk element is heightened, and you've still got to then change. So you start as you mean to go on, I believe. And if you're an amateur fighter coming through, like, get yourself into a good gym, into a good environment. And that's something that Chris Billam-Smith did. He saw, obviously I was super busy at the time, and I said, look, you can come in and we'll do 3 days a week or whatever. But I'm quite a committed coach, so I just worked with him from the off, and like, but he was lucky to be in an environment that he was surrounded by such an array of levels, like people that were starting off their journey alongside him, in Lee McGregor and people like Chantel Cameron. And then you had other people like Frampton, who was a 2-weight world champion, or Groves just become world champion. David Haye was at the end of his career. Like, you had other fighters like that he could see and visually go, kind of try to pick one or two things out. And I think that from an experience standpoint, like, you want to look around the room and say, all right, well, who can I identify with here? Do they have a similar style to me? Am I going to try and sit back like Luke Campbell? Probably not. Am I going to try and be an aggressive fighter like Josh Taylor? Yeah, it might suit me better because I feel comfortable and my vision's better on the inside. Like, you can then start moulding things and say, all right, well, what's the intensity that he's working at on the track, or on the circuits, and then think, all right, well, he's doing that, but he's maybe overcooking it, and I'll look for George to see like how he monitors a slightly older body throughout his camp. Does he spar 3 days a week? Does he spar twice a week? And what sort of rounds? And then you can pick all these things up before you get to crunch time. Okay, you fight for a British title, you fight for a European title, you fight for a world title, you're in a unification fight. So they're so important to get surrounded around these sort of people. And even if you look at someone like Azim, when he first came in, he had a Coley who was a world champion, Daniel Dubois in the gym, he had people like Fowler and other fighters in the gym that he could kind of try and look around the room and think like, all right, well, you can only learn in this scenario.
How is Chris Billam-Smith different now compared to the Chris Billam-Smith of, how many, 8 years ago, 7, 8 years ago now?
7.5 years ago. He's a completely different person. Just a completely different person. He might say he always believed he could achieve this, but I don't necessarily think, his confidence grew with every win, and he is now indestructible. And he surpassed what I believed he was capable of. And he showed me that you can always achieve even more, but initially I don't think he had that genuine belief that he was going to get to this level. So he's grew like immensely as a person, as a character within. And, one thing he's always said is he's always looking, is this going to benefit me? If I eat this fucking donut, is it going to benefit me? Is it the optimal thing for performance? Absolutely not. Okay, let's. Obviously, everyone needs to live at a certain level, but there's a fine line between living too much and not. And then you just waste your talent, and I think, and you waste your career and waste your prime years. And I think like he's managed his outside of the gym life. He's also like immersed himself in the gym for 7.5 years. He probably has only taken one solid holiday, and that was after the Riyadh fight. Went to LA with his wife and child, and he actually had some downtime. But it's like I've had fighters in the past that they've got to world level, and it's like, okay, they might be flying down from Ireland or Scotland or wherever, or traveling from Hull, or and then when they get to that level, they're like, okay, I'll just do an 8-week camp, or I'll do a 10-week camp. I'll just do my fitness, like base fitness here. It's like, we're not a fitness camp. We're a skilled like gym. We're a gym that we're working on your craft day in, day out. Every day we're looking for improvements, whether you're a world champion, a unified world champion, or you're just a turning over amateur. You know what I mean? Look at Canelo. He's working all the time. He might play golf more when he's out. Like, he still trains, he just all does his boxing training, but he might say, all right, well, I'm just going to I'll go and play around a golf, and I'll go and do this, but I'll still get my session in. It just won't be as the first priority of the day. That's why he's achieved so much. Same thing with Mayweather. He just was never out of camp. He was always in the gym, always learning. And like, you can get rusty real quick in this industry. And obviously you can sort of take out sparring and intensities and stuff, but still keeping your eye in and keeping your timing in, because you sit on the couch for 2 years, 3 years. How many great fighters have we seen sit on the couch for 2 years and 3 years and come out of retirement and look abysmal? And I think that is where Chris has excelled.
Quick little battery change there. One of the byproducts of filming all day here in Saudi Arabia. But we are back now, back to the fight. Zurdo Ramirez. It seems as though I've kind of put this to Chris in his last few fights. He was a big underdog against Lawrence Okoli. He was a sizable underdog against Richard Riyadh. He's again an underdog here against Zurdo Ramirez. How difficult of a fight is this compared to your Okolis, your Riyadhs, your Masternaks?
Yeah, every opponent has their own challenges. Obviously, Richard Riyadh and Lawrence Okoli were very similar size and stature size, and you've got people like Masterneck, who is an orthodox, typical European style. And I don't think he emulates Zurdo Ramirez at all. I think we've not really seen a fighter like Zurdo Ramirez that in Chris Billam-Smith's career. So he'll have that Mexican style. He throws lots of punches, and he's a southpaw as well. So, and I think being a light heavyweight moving up, he'll be used to boxing at a slightly higher tempo.
You mentioned there about him being a southpaw. It's something that I put to Chris. Obviously, the first time that he's boxed a southpaw and in a very, very high level fight. But you're somebody with a lot of experience of working with southpaws. Josh Taylor being kind of the obvious example of an elite level southpaw that you've coached. How much of an advantage is that for you, kind of being on the other side of it, I suppose, understanding what goes into? I mean, obviously, I know that every fight is different and every southpaw is different. But is that an advantage for you?
Yeah, I think. I don't think someone like Josh Taylor really used his southpaw attributes to his advantage. I think someone like Luke Campbell did, and I think it's like working around the lead foot and also being strong on the front hand. So I think Zurdo is kind of a blend of both. Someone like Josh or Campbell, where he sits back a little bit, but he's also got that punch output. So the most important thing for us is to get good quality sparring, and we've had a mixture of heavyweights the whole way down to light heavyweight. So like good quality kids as well that have, we might put a heavyweight in at the start for 4, and then we'll finish off the next 8 rounds with lighter guys which just raise that tempo. So and then sometimes you switch it around where we'll put the light heavyweights in first, put a heavyweight in the middle, and then we'll finish off with light heavies as well. So we've had probably about 5 or 6 good quality sparring partners throughout the training camp, and I think he's in a great place. Yes, he hasn't boxed a southpaw, but he's had more than enough rounds to get him ready for it.
One of the kind of running themes of certainly Chris Billam-Smith at world level is seemingly quote unquote being overlooked or underrated, so to speak. I mentioned earlier about him being the underdog against Akoli, the underdog against Riyadh, and the underdog again here. Do you feel like that works in his favour, that people seemingly overlook him or don't necessarily think that he's as good of a fighter as he is?
Yeah, I mean, definitely, but I think he uses that well to his strengths. He uses that well because someone like Richard Riakporhe genuinely believed he was going to blitz him in 2 or 3 rounds, and Lawrence Akoli thought it was a walk in the park, and they've used that against him. We've used that against them. Whereas I think somebody like Zurdo, I think he's used to being in big fights. He's boxed Bivol, and he's had he's been a first ever Mexican super middleweight world champion, and he's the first cruiserweight Mexican world champion. So he's got a load of followers on Instagram. I know he's they love him back in his homeland as well. So I think he'll be looking across at Chris and thinking like, this guy's hit. I think he probably looks at boxing like, this guy's quite hittable, and I'm gonna have a field day. I'm gonna have a high punch output and overwhelm him. But once again, we'll use that confidence against him.
Another person who it seems is overlooking or underrating Chris Billam-Smith is Malik Scott, who is of course part of the Zurdo Ramirez training team. I know you'd have seen some of the comments that he's made. I think words to the effect of, maybe slightly paraphrasing, but he feels that this fight is quote unquote a mismatch, that Zurdo Ramirez is levels above Chris Billam-Smith. Your thoughts on that?
I don't know how he's still got a job after the abysmal stuff that he's done with Deontay Wilder. I don't know how he's still got a job. I think he's just a guy that just talks a lot of shit. And all of the shit he talks, he never comes to truth. You know what I mean? He said that Deontay Wilder is going to be so much more developed and skilled, and he got him shooting to the body with a jab and not using his height or his attributes, and trying to set up like other shots rather than his right hand. Let's be real, it's his best shot. Here's his 1-2, his big right hand, and also snapping that jab out. And he never did any of that in any of the fights. And I think but that guy he hasn't trained anybody to win any fight of merit. You know what I mean? I'm not being arrogant, but I've been in the sport for 14 years. Even the fighters that have moved on, their best days have been in my gym, and we've developed multiple world champions, and we don't go out standing at the top of the thing throwing shade across to other coaches. Like, if someone's going to call me out like Malik Scott, he's like, just go back and look at the track record. So yeah, I mean, I just can't believe Deontay Wilder even employed him after knocking him out in about 30 seconds.
Well, one thing you did say in that interview, one bit of credit you did give Chris Williams, so he said that he's got a good coach in yourself, which I'm sure means a lot to you.
Well, I don't care about him talking that nice shit to me, mate. It annoys me what he thinks of my fighter, and whether he genuinely believes that or not, I'm not sure. But it's just, don't try and make it about yourself. Just go about your business. Zurdo Ramirez has had like 50, close to 50 fights. He's had most of those fights away from Malik Scott, so his influence on the camp's not necessarily going to be that beneficial.
Mentioned earlier on in the interview that we're here in Riyadh, and I don't think many people could have envisioned us being here for a world title unification with Chris maybe a few years ago, maybe even yourself and Chris feel the same way. But one of the things that he's shown in his recent career, particularly boxing at Bournemouth Stadium, boxing Richard Riatpour on away turf, is an ability to handle the occasion each time he stepped up. One of the other examples that we used was Josh Warrington, who's kind of gone through the levels, and at each level he's kind of taken it as it is and performed and exceeded expectations. How beneficial, how important is it for Chris Billam-Smith to have the fight, not the occasion, this weekend?
That's one thing that we've really got to manage. I think a lot of the time going abroad, whether it's Vegas or Philadelphia or Dallas or any of these big places, or Riyadh, it's hard not to sort of feel like you're getting sucked into that big fight and there's more on the line, and there's another. You're not boxing just one person, you're boxing 5 of the greatest fighters of all time. Just I'm saying, like, you can think, oh my God, I must be fighting an amazing fighter to be on this stage, and and then you either start believing in your own hype or building up the other opponent. It's just like, at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if this fight was in the BIC or out here in Riyadh. Like, we know who we got in front of us. It's a hard fight, but it would be like a hard sparring session. You just got to focus in on it. If you start switching off, you're getting punished. That's what boxing's all about. If you don't take it serious, you get hurt. So, but Chris Billam-Smith, like, he doesn't do it for this. Like, he doesn't do it for all this glitz and glamour or fame or anything like that. He does it for accomplishments. He does it to test himself and his own ability and his own willpower and his desire every day. That's what he does this sport for. Yes, of course, he's a prize fighter. He likes to get paid properly, but he's been getting paid well, and he's continued to excel in training. And I think this is just another hurdle that we've got to overcome.
Now, looking around this week, you've got Hall of Famers here, there and everywhere. You've got Oscar De La Hoya, you've got Bernard Hopkins. Now, one Hall of Famer that we are unfortunately not with this week is a certain Barry McGuigan, because he is, how should we describe it? Otherwise engaged down under. But a big miss this week, Barry McGuigan.
Yeah, he's going in the jungle, so it's exciting for him. I think he's genuinely gutted that he's not going to be here for fight week. But it is a once in a lifetime opportunity. He won Hell's Kitchen years ago, and he got asked, loosely got asked a few times if he'd consider the jungle, and he always shut it down. And then, about 4 weeks ago or something, he got the phone call to say, hey, do you fancy going on the show? And his initial reaction was like, let me ask my family. And it was split between us all. And I said, I believed he should go and do it. I think it's great for him. Just take actually the viewing figures away from it. Just say, okay, well, you're going in the jungle, right, with a load of other personalities and people that you've got to, be malleable around. You're not going to be on your phone. You're going to be tested, and your testament and character is going to be tested on multiple different levels, and also you're conquering some fears and stuff. It's just a great process. Obviously, it's a reality show as well, so there's going to have to be some element of gossipy sort of stuff, and and sort of clickbait shit. But most importantly, it's just a detox. It's a detox with different, and dad loves the challenge. So I think it's a fantastic thing for him to do.
You're looking forward to see it? It's different. This is kind of one of those things when you talk to yourself, obviously a son of a Hall of Famer. So different for me imagining my dad going in the jungle. Is it going to be difficult for you to see? Are you interested? It's got to be quite an interesting kind of situation. Yeah,
I think so. I think Dad's a good guy. Do you know what I mean? He's a proper, so many people have come up to me and, I met your dad 30 years ago and I never met a nicer fella and things like that. So, it's good for him to genuinely go out there and just be himself. But it's going to be funny, my kids, my little one Finley, looking at him on the screen and be like, Papa, and all of my brother's kids, Blaine and Jake's kids as well, all watching him doing these funny tasks. It's going to be hilarious, because when he comes back, that's probably going to be the conversations for the next couple of years.
It's going to be an interesting place in the gym when he comes back from the jungle. I'm going to try and fly through the last few here. I know you've got a few other interviews that you've got to do. Saw Adam Azim yesterday working out at the Mike Tyson Boxing Club here in Riyadh. Seems to be a different sort of feel to Adam Azim. I think probably over the last 6 months, obviously had a very good performance against Ahara Davis. Do you get that as the trainer? Obviously you spend more time with Adam than anybody else, but it feels like there's something a bit different about him. Do you think that's accurate?
Confidence, belief. Like, he's always believed he was going to be a great fighter, and he always set this expectation around him. But it's one thing setting these goals and these standards for yourself in the future, and then actually living them. And boxing, professional boxing, is a humbling place. Like, being in the gym every day, training, and the monotony of it, and then hard spars, and I'm one to test people, whether it's like, okay, let's test your ability in sparring, let's get in good kids, and like, I just think all of those years of growth and development is coming out now because he's 22. It's, people forget how young the kid is. Like, he's 22 years of age, and he's already like knocking on the door of world level. So, to beat somebody that people thought, oh, okay, like if Ahara gets through the first couple, like, because of Adam's, like, what Adam had showcased in that up until then, is like, okay, Adam's going to be dangerous early. This was a general consensus. Now in hindsight it's completely different, but Adam's going to be dangerous really early. You should get him out there in the first 3 or 4. But if he doesn't, and Ahara starts using his physicality and starts hitting him hard, and using that like natural heavy hands, because Ahara's a world-class puncher, then it's going to be a telling factor to see how he holds up, when he gets hit on the chin, and all of these things, like, they prevailed in the sense like he got hit on the chin, but he was the one that was pushing Ahara back, using his physicality on the inside. Ahara was the one probably dangerous early, and then as the fight went in, it was Adam that was the one that was devastating and beating him up on the inside, and doing it in a different manner to what people have seen before. So that was worth 10 fights before that one fight, and but it's now going to be like, you see this transition in the kid where every fight's going to be a huge lift for him, and I think he's grown as a person. He's got way more little responsibilities he's taken on for himself, and he's just growing up, and it's a pleasure to witness it. And most important thing for myself is just keeping him grounded, keeping him in love with the sport. And I think we're going to see a really, really great fighter in the next year or two. I'm telling you.
Final one on Adam Azim. There's a couple of 140-pound offerings this weekend. Jose Ramirez against Arnold Barboza. There is also Batir Akhmedov against Oscar Duarte. How far is Adam Azim away from those sorts of levels of opponents? Obviously, the Dalton Smith fight has been one that's been talked about domestically. Where does he stand with those sorts of names, do you think?
I think that he's not far off. He really isn't. I mean, it'll be interesting to see how Ramirez does against Barboza. I think that's a great fight in the next 8 months, 6 months, depends if he prices himself out, Ramirez. It depends where boxing's going to be in the next 10 to 12 months. So, and where Adam's career is going to be taking to. If money and the thing that breaks down most chances of opportunity to box these gradual great progression is that the good opponents price themselves out, because they might be a former world champion and they're used to making 7 figures, and you give them an honest or a decent offer, but it's just not enough for them, so you can't bring them across. And then that's why Riyadh season has been so beneficial to these fighters, because they can bring in good opponents, and they can pay everybody decent money, and then their careers can really excel. And I think that if there's no limiting factors on what the opponent wants, then we can really map his career out in the best way. And I think I've got his next fight sorted and locked in, I think, and then after that we'll be just looking at guys that bring different looks, guys that are counter punchers, guys that are aggressive, tough lads like the Mexican and stuff like that. Because at the end of the day, when you win a world title, if you want to keep a world title, you're going to have to be able to box all of these levels. And I think Duarte is another guy. Like, he's a tough lad. He's heavy-handed. He presses the action. Like, these sort of fights, like, you need those experiences. Will he win a world title? Maybe not, especially now that he's moved up from 135 to 140. It's in a stacked division. You've got the Amparo, Hitchinson. The list goes on. You know, you've got Subriel Matisse. You've got Lopez, but he's not really been active recently. But you've got so many great fighters in and around that weight category. I know Ryan Garcia might move up, but then you got Devin Haney still there. So you got the division stacked. So when you do win a world title, you know, people go, this pressure of Adam Azim boxing Dalton Smith. It's like, well, honestly, in house we don't give a shit about Dalton Smith and what that fight imposes, because we're looking at win a world title. You're going to have guys better than Dalton Smith knocking on the door, and you're going to have guys tougher than him, higher work rate than him, people like that are really can bang and really press you, and they don't just sit back like that. Those are the guys you got to try and beat. You know, so like we're thinking about the top level for Adam Azim and making sure that he's well-rounded as a fighter enough to be able to defend and continue to be a world champion at that level. You know, there's no setting the bar down here for him. It's set that bar as high as we can, because he really is a talented kid.
Just on that, because there will be.
By the way, that's no disrespect towards Dalton Smith, and I'm just saying people are getting hung up on one of them ducking, and I think Dalton Smith has got that mentality where he's setting that standard right up there. So, you know, it's just where these guys want to go in their career.
There will be people who are watching this who will say, well, why not do Adam Azim and Dalton Smith now? But of course, I mean, one of the glaring kind of examples in the past, a fight that you were involved with Carl Frampton and Scott Quick. Is that kind of the way that you're looking at it? Is that a fight that you envision could take place down the line? Or is it a case of, you know, if the price is right, so to speak, you could take that fight?
Exactly. I mean, it's about making you, most of the time you only get one crack at it. Yes, you've got Eubank, Ben and stuff, but they were world champions at that level, making the most amount out of those domestic rivalries. George Groves versus everyone. Oh yeah, but George Groves boxed James DeGale at that level, British level. It's like George Groves got, I would say, like 1/25th of what he got to box his last fight. Do you see what I'm saying? And the intent was beat Callum Smith and then go and box James DeGale at Wembley for like 30 times the money that they boxed in the first fight. But that never materialised. So it's like, well, make that one count. If there's a genuine rivalry, then make it bloody count. And I don't care if people point the finger at me and go, oh, you know, I'm thinking about the kids. Both of, like, even that's the same thing that I don't know who's managing Dalton Smith for. That's the same thing on their end. Like they have to be looking at the most amount of bang for your buck on that fight, because it's simmering nice. It's just building.
Okay, and final one, we'll wrap things up with this weekend. Gilberto Zurdo Ramirez against Chris Billam-Smith for the WBA and WBO cruiserweight titles. How does it play out, Shane?
It's a hard fight from the off. It's up to us to make sure that we implement what we want to do in the fight. And I think we've got to force Ramirez to box our fight from the off. And I think if he can do that and he can sustain it and he doesn't have lapses in concentration, he wins the fight. He potentially stops him. But if he switches off, it can be a hard night's work. So we got to go in there focused and razor on it.
Okay, there we have it. Shane McGuigan, thanks very much for speaking to Boxing News. I'm sure I'll catch up with you between now and the fight. Thanks very much.
Cheers, Rob. Thanks, mate.